What's up everybody, my name is Greg Farnham and today I'm going to be doing my first ever PC build designed for editing, gaming, and streaming, and I can't wait to start putting all this stuff together and figuring it out, so let's get into it. This is my first time ever building a PC, so I am no expert and I'm not really going to show you a build and installation of all these different components, but I did have some friends help me out and I think we got a pretty good setup here. So I want to go through all the different components and talk about why we ended up going with each of these for this build and where it's really going to help me out in that editing, gaming, and streaming setup. If you're interested in any of the components or parts that I'm talking about in this video, it's all going to be linked to in the description down below, so you can learn more and pick some of these up if you want to. Now let's get into the actual parts that I have here, starting with the tower. This is the Fractal Design Meshify C ATX mid tower with the tempered glass. You have to get the tempered glass because once we get all these RGB components in there, it's going to look absolutely amazing. Now I decided to go with the ATX mid tower over the full because this is going to actually be living on my desk. I don't want to put it underneath. I want to have it up there as almost like an art piece. That's another reason why I went with that tempered glass. So you can see all the components in there, all the RGB lights, and it's going to have a really cool aesthetic in my room once I get it all set up. I also love the design of the case, having this 3D mesh on the front, which is going to have the RGBs shine through really nicely and having this full white frame. It also has some really great ventilation for this tower, having grates basically all the way around, including on the top. And it also comes with a magnetic dust filter, which matches the mesh on the front of the tower, and it just makes it super easy to clean. The tower also comes with two separate fans, an intake fan and an exhaust fan, which I'm probably going to end up swapping out in the future, which I'll talk about towards the end of this video. Next up is the motherboard, and for this one I decided to go with the Asus Prime X570 Pro, and there were really only two requirements I had when I was looking for a motherboard. The first one was that it ran AMD chips, because that's what we decided to go with for the CPU, and the second part is that it also had SLI, so I could get a second graphics card if I needed that down the line. This also keeps with the theme of the build, which is really just black and white with colored RGBs, and also has plenty of ports to plug in all the peripherals, keyboards, mice, monitors, all of that stuff, and this is going to work perfectly for this setup. Next up is the CPU, and like I mentioned with the motherboard, I went with AMD. This is the Ryzen 9 3900 12-core 24-thread CPU. It's an absolute beast of a processor, and it compares to the i9-9900K from Intel. Now, the reason I went with the AMD Ryzen 9 over the Intel version is it actually performed a little bit better in the benchmarks than the Intel CPU, and that's really where I'm going to be making my money with this computer, is through the editing, because I do a lot of video production and content creation, so I really need that to be on par. If you do want to do a lot more gaming, the Intel actually performed better and you get higher frames per second, but I'm not too worried about it with this processor. I think I'm going to be fine and not really have any noticeable differences. The other great thing about the Ryzen 9 is that it's actually a much better value than the Intel i9, because instead of just getting a CPU, you also get a CPU cooler with it, which is pretty awesome, and this is an RGB one at that. Now I'm actually going to be swapping it out for this Noctura NH-U12S. Just needed a little bit beefier of a cooling system because I plan on putting a lot of pressure on the CPU and I want to make sure that it doesn't overheat. For most people, and even in most cases that I'm going to be using it, the cooler that comes with it is going to be totally fine, but I wanted to beef it up just to be safe. So I got this Noctura fan, which is also supposed to be pretty quiet, so it's going to help keep the noise down on this PC, especially it being on the desk. All right, so next up, we're going to be looking at the GPU, or the graphics card. Now for this, I went with the GTX 1080 Ti, which I know is an older graphics card at this point, but I know a lot of editors who still trust this card and they use it all of the time, and it's definitely been a workhorse for them. Now I went with this one specifically because the other one, which I was looking at, which was the 1080 Ti FTW, wouldn't actually fit in the case. That one has a few more fans in it to keep the cooling down, but I think I'm going to have enough flow through this with all the fans that I have and the case design that I'm not going to have to worry about overheating too much. The other thing I wanted with this was to go with the Ti version versus the regular version. Yes, it does cost a little bit more, but you get up to that 11 gigabytes of RAM, which is super important for your graphics card, especially if you're going to be throwing a lot of footage at it and you're going to be doing a lot of rendering. And it's also going to be able to handle pretty much whatever game I throw at it that's currently out. It also can run SLI like the motherboard, so I could pick up a second one of these if I wanted to. I picked this one up from Amazon Renewed, so it's actually been a refurbished model of this 1080 Ti, but I do get a 90-day warranty with it, and it was a lot cheaper than picking one up brand new. So I definitely recommend looking at Amazon Renewed. If you're looking to pick up some parts for your build, you might save a couple bucks, and it helped me put that money into other places in this build. Moving on to some of the last few items before we get into actually building it, I picked up some G.Skill DDR4 RAM. This is the Trident Z Neo. It's got RGB lights in it, and it's two 16 gigabytes for 32 gigs in this build. I have 4 slots on my motherboard, so if I wanted to pick up 2 more 16 gigs, I could get 64 gigs, or I could try and bump up and get some bigger RAM in there if I wanted to in the future if I needed to upgrade. But I think 32 gigs is a great starting point. You also need to have some memory in there. So for the SSD, I picked up this Samsung 970 EVO M.2 drives. Now these drives are insanely fast, which is gonna be really great for editing off of this drive, and then I can transfer them to other drives later on. There's also a couple slots on this motherboard for these M.2 drives, so it's gonna be super great to have this, and this is a 1 terabyte. Yeah, this is the 970 EVO M.2. These things are absolutely amazing. They're super small, super lightweight, which is gonna be really great for this build. And finally, you need something to power all of these different parts. So for this, I went with the GameMax 850 watt RGB PSU, and this thing is gonna be plenty of power to power all of the RGB lights, the GPU, the CPU, the motherboard, all of the things I have in this computer, and some. And I would highly recommend, if you have it in the budget, to get a higher wattage power supply unit. It's gonna allow you to upgrade in the future and have parts that might draw more power than what you currently have, and then you don't have to swap out the power supply unit as well as that part. So that's basically everything that's gonna be going inside the computer. Again, if you want any more information on anything I talked about in this video, any of these components and parts, they're all gonna be linked to in the description down below. Now let's get into the actual build and start putting this all together and get a computer running. That was a super fun project build. I had an absolute blast putting it together. And it was honestly a lot easier than I thought it would be. I was expecting it to be like super complicated, but everything's really laid out well. All the instructions with like the power supply and the motherboard, where things go and where stuff plugs in, is super easy to understand. And if you have any sort of technical background, you should have no problem building one of these of your own. So if you've been thinking about doing it, you should definitely go in because it was a lot of fun. Now you might have noticed in the last couple shots that I actually added in some RGB fans. Those are not the ones that come with the case. These are extra ones that I bought. They are the Corsair QL120 RGB fans. It comes with a kit of 3. And these are definitely an additional thing that are totally just for looks. Obviously they add a little bit of airflow, but there's 2 fans that come with this that work perfectly fine because of all the like grates and openings on this case. But I wanted to pick those up because I think they just look absolutely amazing in here. And they have some really awesome functionality when you're in the computer and the software. You can change them to do different like strobing effects. You can have them cycle through the RGBs like they are now, do some rainbow effects, all kinds of stuff. So if you're looking to pick up some new fans for your build, I'd highly recommend these Corsair QL120 RGBs. Again, like I mentioned before, everything that I've talked about and everything that's in this build is all gonna be linked to in the description down below, so you can go check it out and find out more information about it. Now I gotta get this back up into the office, get it set up, and start putting it to work. If you guys enjoyed this build as much as I did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more videos on filmmaking, photography, creative, tech stuff. I'm gonna be getting on a pretty regular schedule going forward, so I'll see you in the next one.